Well, now that I know like half of the people in the room, we'll just have a little bit of fun with this instead of being all serious. So I'll breeze through it, and then Max, I know you're going to have at least 6 questions. Gino, based on the conversation you just had, probably 3. Vienna, I got at least 1 coming from you, so I'm excited. But all right, here we go. So I want to talk. I've given this talk actually in Hong Kong, as a matter of fact, and in China. So since half of you know me, I'll give a short intro. I'm Kyle Ellicott. I'm an entrepreneur and investor who has spent the majority of my time in the US working with various startup ecosystems, and then working my way into the venture markets and venture ecosystems, and building a bridge between the US, Asia, and then leading that into the greater world. And a lot of my time spent in these cities was either in their infancy, mid-stage in their life, or after the ecosystem had already been built and thriving. So in the early days of the Los Angeles and Southern California tech scenes, to the more growing and mature ecosystems of somewhere like Shenzhen or New York, to a thriving city like here in the Bay Area, and having a chance to witness really what it takes to build these ecosystems for startups to thrive. A lot of the work that I did in Asia and Hong Kong, in other cities here in the States, to then what it takes to build these maturing venture capital markets and how this all works together. So today we're going to go through a framework that I've been fine-tuning over the years, and have presented around the world, and have had the chance to get input from some leading investors to governments, and have shared that back with them to develop the ecosystems that we all hang out and live in today. So Max, you're going to recognize a lot of names in this presentation. So much love to Hong Kong. So Silicon Valley, when people think about startups, when they think about startup ecosystem, when they think about venture capital, the first thing that comes to mind is Silicon Valley, and that they have to be in Silicon Valley to be successful, or they have to build the next Silicon Valley. I couldn't tell you how many times in my life I have heard the phrase, we want to be the next Silicon Valley. And while it's great to inspire to be, it's really not at the same time. What I think a lot of people may not know or tend to forget is that Silicon Valley is the valley because of so many factors and a long history. It took 50 to almost 65 plus years today to make the Bay Area what it is. And it continues to be what it is due to the fact that it's a well-oiled machine, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of bumps, and it's a continuously replenished ecosystem. Most cities around the world, it's been one and done, or just slow and bumpy. The realization is the Valley went through the same thing. But we've continued to reinvest and continue to see this ecosystem give something back every time it makes something. And a lot of this has been led to top accelerators in the world starting and continuing to be here, which are driven by endless amounts of capital, tons of events and conferences, even in times like today, and virtual summits like we're going through right now. There's huge companies here that you can tap into that are very open to learn from, work with, and also be educated as an employee before going on. And there's a community that's constantly wanting to see each other succeed and to give back. And as I mentioned, it sounds great. I mean, this picture looks beautiful. It looks like a great place to be, but it might not always be the best place for you as a startup. It also might not be the best representation model for you as a city, or as a venture capitalist as well, where you're looking to deploy capital for many different reasons, which we'll get into. So as the Valley is now the Valley, when it wasn't 50 years ago, today's venture funding landscape looks completely, vastly different than it did when the Valley first started. Even in about 10 years ago, when I started in the Los Angeles tech scene, I mean, we had VCs, we had angels, and maybe one or two accelerators at the time. Today, you go to somewhere like Los Angeles, Austin, Hong Kong, you go to Singapore, you go to Amsterdam, you go to any of these places around the world, and not only do you have access to such vastly larger pools of local capital, but you now have global capital at dramatically bigger levels than we've ever seen before. So when before it was just venture and it was a little bit of government and a little bit of angels, today we see huge global funds from corporates. We see cross-border funds. So Vienna, like we were just talking about moments ago, this back and forth between here and Asia, there are a ton of cross-border funds that are focused solely on bringing business to Asia or Asia to the US, to Europe, to different countries around the world that continue to fund various companies. We also have new and emerging areas like fractional ownership and ICOs or STOs, whatever you want to call them these days. We have syndicates. We have so many different ways of grabbing capital that the way that this used to be done is just no longer the way it is today. And that has changed how venture capital markets mature, but it has not necessarily changed how startup ecosystems have matured, because there's still a huge local component to all of that, no matter how much access to capital or how readily available capital may be. So who makes up an ecosystem? There's four main players that make up a successful ecosystem: government, entrepreneurs, investors, and then private equity and or the public markets. Each of these four play a very, very dynamic and involved role in making sure that the framework that you're going to see functions, is replenished, and can be successful. When one of these doesn't work, it doesn't happen very well. And there's numerous examples of cities around the world where we've seen this just start and flounder very, very quickly. But also, in order for an ecosystem to be successful, you need to have investments be successful. So no matter how much money or how many different support systems you're putting out there, you still need to have levels of success. My time in Hong Kong, when the ecosystem was in its very infancy, some of the things I'm going to show you on the government side, they were doing very well, but at the time, investments in they hadn't had the exits or the maturity in companies that they do today. And now you're starting to see that ecosystem really start to thrive in ways that it always wanted to as well. So government, what is government's role? Most people hear government when it comes to anything and get very nervous and want to step away. But I tell you, government, this entire framework begins there. The Valley actually became the Valley because of the government here in the US and helping to co-fund some of the initial venture funds, and companies as well that started here in the semiconductor industry that would later create more entrepreneurs and create more venture capital and then go into the public markets and replenish the cycle ongoing. And so in Asia, I saw a ton of this. I know in Europe, we're starting to see much more activity around this as well. But first and foremost, the government needs to be a leader and a champion. They need to be the loudest voice out there saying how great their ecosystem is, how great their country is, why it is so great to come there to build either a company or to start investing in as well. And then their next job, and this is actually how I entered Hong Kong in the Asia ecosystem, is they have to bring people. So just because you have the greatest place in the world doesn't mean that anyone actually wants to be there. So, or do anything. So what you do is you end up bringing people, experts, entrepreneurs, executives, you bring big events all from abroad, drop them in locally, either for short times or long times to help kind of jumpstart your ecosystem. So for Hong Kong, I was brought in a few different times to give speeches, along with other executives to share our insights, work with local entrepreneurs, work with the local government to help fine tune and also show our belief that that area and that region, what now is today the Greater Bay Area, was a place to come and build a company. The government also needs to be the one that leads and starts building programs or schemes. Here in the US, the word scheme can get a little skittish. The rest of the world, scheme is a good thing. These are to support the early growth in companies, whether that's investment, it's grants, entrepreneur and residence programs or EIRs, the early incubators, and technology parks. Again, Asia is a great example of where the government has gotten involved at these stages and created huge technology parks, incubation programs, just to get things kick-started. And what you see is a waterfall effect from that of other more locally established programs from former entrepreneurs, successful or not, corporates getting involved in these efforts as well. And then they help create opportunities for foreign talent that wants to return. So ease of visas, bank accounts, applications, everything to make it easier to come, soft land and get started, along with economic zones, tax breaks, which we're starting to see here in the US as a new merging, I would say, opportunity the government has started around opportunity zones and economic zones with tax incentives and breaks for you to go. And even some cities now are providing entrepreneurs, $10,000 to come live there for 3 months and start their company locally. This is the government's role to do this type of stimulus as well. Bringing big global events. Hong Kong, as Max knows, brought what was known as the Web Summit to Hong Kong being RISE. Also see CES and other conferences that are being brought around the world into these cities, further bringing people, helping to educate, bringing opportunity and to jumpstart. And at the end of the day, after all of this, they have to embrace the open global economy. If you're going to do all this and you're going to shut it off and just not let anything happen, not let anything in and out, it's going to be tough, it's going to be slow, and it's probably not going to work. So you need to embrace the openness of the rest of the world. The second piece is entrepreneurs. All of us. We have a major role in this. If the government has done all this and put all these things in place, we need to take advantage of that, right? We need to build. Very clearly, we need to build companies, we need to develop technologies, we need to get out there and get our hands dirty and do something. But at the same time, we need to be leaders and drive the community. As we're building, we should be helping to educate each other, provide resources, lessons learned. It's a continuous cycle. As entrepreneurs, we get, in a lot of cases, so much advice, so much guidance, so many resources. You've got to pay that back. In the early days of Los Angeles in Southern California, I watched this happen in such a beautiful way of, being 20, 25 of us to then 30 to then 50 to 100, constantly giving back to each other. Even more so in Austin, you look at cities like New York, Hong Kong, again, to call out Max, it is a constant, we're all in this together. So let's all help drive this community forward. Go with sharing and then reinvest. So you're reinvesting in the community. If you have an exit, you have a little bit of extra capital, you are now investing back into the ecosystem, whether it's putting on events, investing directly into the companies, however you can to help further grow that community in some way. Developing co-working spaces, as I said, government gets the early ones beginning, entrepreneurs, including myself, go off and start accelerators or incubators or co-working spaces to further development of those ecosystems as they go. And then you become the entrepreneur, the champion, and help drive and bring more people locally to the region that may be developing. Third, venture capital investments. This is the other role we play. So as entrepreneurs, we start to have those successes or those failures, those lessons learned, and then we may go and move on into the venture capital and investment space. And as investors, we play a very special role because 1, we have capital, but 2, we also have experience, and 3, we have a voice and people look up to us. So as venture capitalists or investors, you need to be active. You need to be out there. You need to be active as an investor, investing at whatever stage or with whichever theme is relevant for you, and doing it. Saying you're an investor, not investing, that's not helpful to a growing ecosystem. But actually taking that step, writing a check, or investing in some sort of entity and company around the world, that's stage one. Educate the ecosystem, work with the local governments, work with other VCs and investors, family offices, work with the largest startups, help educate that local ecosystem on what kind of to do or not to do, and based on your lessons learned. Provide guidance to younger founders. One of the things that we're seeing more and more of is entrepreneurship at an even younger age. I started my first company at 14. I thought I was an outlier. Today, that seems more common than not. As investors, we want to be there to provide guidance and resources at all stages. And this is very important, especially now in the situation we're in, where companies have to make very quick adjustments. They're in times that they may not understand or may not know. As investors, we've been through cycles like this, or you've been through cycles like this. You want to be able to provide that guidance. Be there as a resource, provide as much as you can to help companies navigate and weather the storm or the sunshine, in either case that it may be. Take an active role in the community. Go out there, speak at events, go to events, attend, be active. Don't just sit in an office and hope that the best comes to you, because it typically doesn't. And then growth. So you're helping to push that ecosystem forward with finding new ways of liquidity, opportunities, or policy changes as well. Again, go back to Hong Kong. This is a great example where the Hong Kong government created matching programs. They created programs for local VCs and foreign VCs to invest in local companies. This was all driven by the community in partnership with the government. This is a huge opportunity that as investors, we have a voice, we are looked up to. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. You get to help drive that policy. We're seeing the same thing in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, seeing this in Mexico, again, the Netherlands, and many other countries around the world. And last but not least, private equity and public markets. Sole job of those is to provide a path of liquidity for everyone involved. Without this, the cycle just stops short. This is the thing that provides liquidity, provides the opportunity for the ecosystem to replenish itself continuously and ongoing. So as I mentioned in the beginning, in order for the ecosystem to be successful, you need to have investments to be successful. You need to have role models. You need to work within a framework, and the government is where it all begins. And the government is the one who is that local leader and champion, the loudest voice in the room, helping to encourage and bootstrap those early entrepreneurs who become even a louder voice, who then become the venture capitalists who become even a louder voice, and then when they hit the public markets, become even louder and restart this entire cycle all over again. While each ecosystem always, for again, some reason or another, wants to look back and say, I want to be the next Silicon Valley, it's not always that anymore. You know, it's best to actually redefine yourself individually from one city or one country or one place from the next. There are great cities that do things so well based on the resources, the talent, and maybe the companies that they have within the region and what's developed there locally. So while you might be thinking about becoming the next Silicon Valley, look at it for all the years that it took to build and the model that I'm presenting you today, and have that as a starting point, but really develop an individualized mindset when you're building and thrive on what you do best. Other key factors that do play a role in this is mindset. So mindset of a failure, and this is something that I think we're seeing improve upon anywhere in the world right now, is mindset of a failure does not mean it's the end. It does not mean that it's it's game over. Instead, you should embrace failure and help those who have come down towards failure and get them restarted and help them continue to learn from those lessons to continue to move. Along with information, the more information you can provide of what's happening in the ecosystem, where it's happening, data, along with publicizing and really getting out there those early success stories to make people feel encouraged to see examples of how they can build and learn as well in these ecosystems. I want to show you a quick snapshot from Startup Genome. I think this is just a great picture. So as I mentioned, everyone starts out saying they want to be the next Silicon Valley. And here's actually the top, I believe it's the top 30 cities around the world ranked by Startup Genome's 2019 survey. While the Bay Area is at the top and ranks first across the board, look at all the cities below. Each and every one of those cities has something very unique and very special to them that they focus on and do very well. So if you're looking to build in, say, medical devices, you may want to look at cities like Boston, where there's a huge focus around healthcare and the medical industry, or Detroit, where there is as well. If you're looking to build in the blockchain or cryptocurrency space, you may want to look to somewhere like Austin, as well as many other cities around the country. If you're looking to maybe build something in not just entertainment, but also supply chain and logistics, Los Angeles has really started to have a thriving scene, and that's the Los Angeles greater area as well. So as I mentioned, Hong Kong, and I love to show this slide as well, because all these cities, the ones you saw before, there's so much we can talk about, all the good, the lessons learned, and everything that happened in all of these cities. You know, seeing Dallas in its early days to where it is today. As I mentioned, Austin now saw, I think, almost $3 billion in venture capital in 2019 as one of the top cities in the US in capital investments. All of these cities are building and doing great things, but none of them were built in a day, right? It took years of dedication, in some cases still is, and multiple moving pieces and constantly dedicated people that have set up shop, are not moving, and are looking to be there in the long haul to help develop the local ecosystem. And based on my research and conversations, found it takes about an average of 15 to 20 years for a thriving ecosystem to really get developed and go as a rocket ship that we all want them to be as well. And if you're looking for other cities to kind of reference to, check out Salt Lake City, Sydney, Australia. These are two very big cities that are starting to just explode as an entrepreneur hub, with all of these resources becoming very rich and plentiful. Same within Colombia and Mexico as a whole. So next steps. So if you're looking to build an ecosystem, you're working in one of those areas and you want to do something and really get your local region going, here's a quick guide. Connect, share everything. No reason to keep it all to yourself. We do what we do. We take the lessons, no matter how hard or soft they may be, the wins, the losses. We do it for a reason, and we do it to share, we do it to learn, and to help educate others. Realize it's going to take more time, and give it more time. Don't expect tomorrow to wake up and that your city is the next greatest thriving city in the world. Find and help to make more local champions, and be loud about those champions in any way, shape, or form that you can be. Work to bring back experience, talent from around the world to the local region. As founders, help other founders. Give your time in some way, shape, or form back to those who are building the next generation after you. Create more startup programs, more events and conferences, including ones like this, as we're all having to do these virtual summits right now. The more we can have these types of events and conferences, the more we can share with each other. Work to create more exits, find ways of creating liquidity, whether it's secondary markets, it's special public markets for small cap companies, whatever it may be. Help find more exit opportunities, even including M&A as well. And then invest and continue to reinvest locally as much as you possibly can. And if you want to go and start helping ecosystems abroad, personal advice I would give you is actually go to where you're going to be investing. Go to where you want to help be successful. If you want to see the city of Sydney and the greater area of Australia be successful, you need to go there. You can't just do it from somewhere in the world and expect to be the biggest supporter. You need to go there, live there, eat there, breathe there, and be a presence locally in any way, shape, or form. And again, give it time. So while everything's working to continue to mature, and you've seen this framework in each of our roles that we're going to play in it, as an entrepreneur who may be in the audience today, how can you hack this? And how can you stand out in a city like Silicon Valley or other thriving ecosystems? Well, here's a little quick how-to guide. 1, be global. 2, act local. 3, think vertical. What does that mean? Day 1, have a very global mindset of what you're building. Think about all the customers in the world, because we no longer have just local customers. We have customers everywhere. I remember a company I worked with and advised years ago had a crowdfunding campaign where they thought their customers were in one state in the world. After the crowdfunding campaign, they found they had customers in 80 countries around the world. Dramatically changed their mindset and how they focus and what they thought their customers wanted and where they thought they wanted. So from day 1, do yourself a favor, be global and think on that big scale. Act local. Everything we just talked about, continue to give back and be present locally in your startup ecosystem. Think vertical. Think about the industry you're in and dominate that industry. Don't deter away from it. Stay within that vertical or industry as much as you can. Get out there. There's plenty of resources. I could list them for days. Free resources to create profiles, to get yourself visible in any way, shape, or form to the world. There's plenty of accelerator and incubator programs or co-working spaces that you can go sit at and apply and just learn and have access to more resources than you can imagine. Seek as much traction and press or publicity as you possibly can. And summits or conferences and events like we're at today are great resources. Podcasts, blogs, doesn't matter how big, how small, just take advantage of the opportunity. You'll thank yourself later for doing so. And if not, you'll have a fun laugh listening to your very first interview to your very last interview. And last but not least, don't be stealth. If you're going to be stealth, don't complain about why you're not getting attention. Don't complain about why you're not getting traction. Get out there. You're probably not the first to think about your idea. I guarantee that. So get out there, start talking, start showing yourself. This is a short little hack at how you can stand out, not only in the Bay Area, but also in very mature startup ecosystems around the world. So as I mentioned in summary, building mature venture capital markets, they take a lot of time, an average of 15 to 20 years to really get developed and really start thriving. Everyone has a role to play, beginning with the government, to us as entrepreneurs, to us as investors, and the public and private markets around liquidity. Keep the mindset that failure is not the end, it's a lesson learned. And be ready to reinvest continuously in the ecosystem or systems that you choose to base yourself in any one of these categories. I'm Kyle Ellicott. Reach out to me anywhere on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Medium, if you have any questions, and I'll share the slides afterwards. Thank you. Oh, yes, universities. I got a quick question. I'll just answer it real quick. So universities, this is a great question. So universities, in my opinion, actually play an underlining role in all of this. At the bottom, and I'll turn my video back on real quick. So at the bottom layer, they actually play a very unique role. They're helping to support the government. They're helping to support the entrepreneurs. They're actually creating a lot of those technology parks. They're helping to fund technology or spin technology out. They are working to really help give more to those entrepreneurs. In some cases, they're providing the liquidity or they're providing the investors. So universities and education actually sit now more than ever at the bottom across all of those areas. So cool. All right, I think that's my time. Cool. Gino, did you have a quick question?
Well, just with all the changes right now, given, the presentation that you gave was the traditional kind of venture, startup nation, type thing. But then now things are changing, right? So there's more focus on impact investment. One of the things we're focusing on is reframing entrepreneurship and organizational culture, looking at it from the perspective of personal development and really looking at new models of what the venture entrepreneurship thing should be, given, things got really big, if you look at SoftBank and, all of that debacle and, too big to fail is failing.
Yeah.
And so, given this new environment, what should the new model be like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'd say on intrapreneurship is sometimes what it's been referred to is it's almost a case-by-case basis. I have seen everyone try to follow a similar framework and fail, or try their own frameworks and fail. And the reason for that generally is similar to the framework we just went through. So instead of the government, it's the corporation. So the corporation actually has to be the biggest champion and has to be that leader and has to be supportive throughout the entire process. So what happens in typical situations from what I've seen is a corporation says, hey, we want to champion our employees and we want them to build businesses or solutions that we'll spin out and we'll support.
But that never works because the culture is different.
Right. So culture is one piece, but it's actually not one of the fundamental reasons. So if you look at QuickBooks or Intuit, excuse me. So what Dan Gilbert did at Intuit and QuickBooks, sorry, not QuickBooks, Quicken, is actually a very good example of that. So while he as a founder has the mentality, they separated the companies. So the culture didn't clash nearly as much, but they were also in it for the long haul. Most corporations give up. So they say, oh, let's do this. And they treat it as a project, and projects have end dates, right? They don't create it as a division. And if you look at someone like SoftBank, and just as a simple example, or better yet, maybe someone like Verizon. Verizon looks at it and says, hey, we're not just going to create entrepreneurship, but we're also going to create this whole division, which is Verizon Ventures. And within Verizon Ventures, we are going to not just fund companies, but we're going to help create this ecosystem internally to invest in, to reinvest in, to support, to provide resources, access to technology, et cetera. Sony and Samsung is probably a better example of that. But the model has changed further, and unfortunately, we've got to jump, but I can give you a few other examples of that. Yeah. So, cool. Well, thank you, everybody. Max, I'll talk to you later. Good seeing you. Gina, thank you. Vienna, pleasure to meet you. Everyone else, thank you so much. Tim, thanks for the comments, and everyone have a great day, great night.